of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial. How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time that I call near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear. Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going over Clay Douglas show? My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something. We both took the same Bible. To defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that. How can I see the things that your eyes blinded by the light? He is the free American, Clay Douglas. Blinded by the light. That's the Free America, weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. Every time I think about this damage that's been done, the anger will inside me till I'm almost to go. I want to never move now, the sky is up to For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamericans.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8661.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I'm your host. I am Clay Douglas. And, hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day, a memorable Memorial Day. Never quite know what to say about Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day doesn't seem appropriate. My guest today is James Maioho. James, how am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, Maioho. You're darn close.
Maioho. All right. Sounds Hawaiian.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. James, I've got a little bit of information up on my website and my blog talk about you. You're the author of a book called Winners Give Up. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
Now that what I've got here is inspirational insights into the habits of accomplishing your personal goals. The book was a labor of hope and commitment to doing the things necessary to climb back from the abyss. Fulfillment of an inner need to inspire others who want to be the best possible version of themselves. Now, the title on that doesn't seem to apply. How did you come up with that title? And give me a little bit of let's do an introduction of you. Tell me about you. You know, people have asked me, what does it take to be a writer, Clay? And I said, well, you got to write. So, tell me about yourself, James.
The origins of the book, you kind of read from the back page there, came out of a real period of my life where I could not do anything right. I had been living out of state. I'm originally from Michigan and had been down with a daughter in Kansas City and got into an estranged relationship, and I had given up my job for that and moved back to Michigan, and we'd moved into kind of our childhood farm with my with my father, and I couldn't send a resume out. I couldn't get an interview. I couldn't find work to save my life. And this is from a guy who I have a music degree. I have business degrees from a very nice small Catholic college. I had worked for big firms selling bonds, had all my security licenses, had spent a number of years with a Fortune 500 company, had also been a consultant doing turnaround business consulting all over the country for a period of years, and had really a very accomplished work history, and could not get somebody to pick up the phone on the other end, and had really tried to find something positive to do with my time, and had really a lot of things to overcome and bad habits in my own life to incorrect thinking and things that weren't moving my career, my personal life forward to overcome. And that's really where the book came out of. I just sat down and had to do something positive and to get some momentum moving forward, and started writing this book and talking to people about it and getting stories and just putting down insights that I've gotten from either my travels as a consultant or from the corporate world and from other businesses, and put those out and shed a lot of my own baggage and refined myself in order to kind of try to become the best possible version of myself. So the Winners Give Up is a play on words. It's really, this book is 53 or so insights into a variety of areas of things you really kind of have to give up and shed to really get one step closer towards fulfilling your own personal goals, whatever they may be.
Yeah, it struck me as being an oxymoron. You know, I've told people you can't lose until you quit. You know, I mean, I would be thinking that winners never give up. So how did you this logic? How did you come by that?
I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time?
The winners give up seems to me to be the exact opposite of what winning is. Winners, to me, never give up. They never quit.
Right, exactly, and that's the play on words. But also, winners don't do things like drag around a lot of their own emotional baggage. They drop those. They give those things up. Some winners, there's a section in the book, I'm looking at some of the titles, they don't give up. They give up things like dropping bad relationships and negativity around them. Those are things that they don't carry around. They don't, if you're going to be an athlete and you want to excel in the 100 meters, you give up eating fast food every day, as a real simplified example. So they give up blaming others. So winners do give up things. But when you look at that, I mean, the purpose of it was to be an eye-catching title, right? So if you think deeply into it, winners do really give up a lot of things. They don't carry around a lot of the extra, unnecessary negative things, a lot of the self-defeating paradigms, a lot of the negative energy or bad habits that are barriers for us getting from point A to point B.
Well, I can understand that. I've had a few tragedies and attempts in my life. You heard from the commercial at the intro to the show that I've been called controversial. And
yeah.
Controversial enough that people have tried to kill me from time to time. But, you know, I couldn't dwell on that. I had to leave that behind. I had to move on. And I've done that. I've been rebuilding my businesses and rebuilding my life after an accident, so-called accident, 10 years ago. Looking forward to being able to read more of that. Now, what do you do? Now, I've got Madco up here. I've got the links to your sites up on the show. You do sales building, change consulting, management coaching, speaking and group training. You got 20 years of business building and development experience. And I like this.
Right, I do. Go ahead.
I like the part where you say we specialize in partnering with small business owners and entrepreneurs to achieve personal and business goals.
Right. The Maioho Group is my personal consulting company, and right now it focuses mostly on doing local work in the state of Michigan where I live, and it's really an outlet for me to reach out to. I've been doing a lot of work with minority contractors and minority companies in the state of Michigan and other parts of the country too, as I feel that it is right, and take them on to help grow their business or help business owners and small entrepreneurs learn the business of running a business, increasing revenue, getting kind of their house in order so they can move a step closer to what their goals are with the business, whether it be financial, whether it be personal. And what I've found really with small business owners and entrepreneurs, the real desire of a business owner is, it may not be to do $1 million in revenue, it may not be to do 5 or 10. The real goal for a guy that opens a business is, he wants to take care of his kids, he wants to put them through college. He may want to have, say, a cottage up on the lake, right? And so the business itself is a means or a vehicle to getting the things that the owners or the people who are in the business really want. And what I try to do when I'm working with somebody in that capacity is to figure out what it is we really want. Because a business, it takes up so much of our time as an entrepreneur, and it's so personal that we really need to understand where we're going and what the purpose of doing that is, and then build a properly run mechanism around that to achieve that, which goes into a whole other realm of the nuts and bolts of running and building a business.
What did you specialize in? Any certain types of businesses, or do you go anywhere?
I've done probably close to 300 site visits in 40 some odd states, most of them. And it generally ranges the gamut. Most of them I think have been contractors and small manufacturing, but I've done quite a few service industries and businesses, including professionals, architects and lawyers. And the thing it really doesn't matter what the business is, because the business of running your business is pretty much the same, even if you change verticals and you go from market to market. Now, I could never walk into a guy that has a small machine shop and is turning out small assemblies or lathing metal or something. I could not do that better than that guy does. That guy has honed his craft. That guy has learned a trade and knows the ins and outs of building that particular product or owning that skill. What the guy doesn't do well, or woman, is run the business of managing that, promoting that, having quantifiable and goals and the mechanisms of his business that sets it up, as something that builds value for himself that either one day he could retire from or build value to sell. What most people do is they fall in love with their product or service, and they go about trying to make the best widget possible or provide the best, lawyerly advice or whatever they're going to specialize in. And they fall so in love with that, and it means so much to them emotionally and personally that they start wearing all the hats in it. They don't really define things. They don't hire people correctly and define what they're supposed to be doing and properly manage them, and they get tunnel vision. So they end up flying by the seat of their pants, trying to make something happen with whatever their passion or focus is. And it ends up they either stagnate and go out of business, because 80% of businesses that are startups fail within the first 5 years. 80% of the remaining 20 fail within the next 5 years. And it's generally due to just flying by the seat of your pants and lack of planning and lack of having a business structure.
Now, what about the economy? I mean, I have run a successful publishing company for well over 20 years. And suddenly, it's like nothing works because nobody's got any money. Well, part of it is the fact that I'm really under heavy attack. My career now spans pissing off 4 presidents. And, I think that's actually a good thing. I've told the truth about them. But I've done things before, standardly. I mean, I bought my paper from the printers. The printers bought their paper from Hearst Paper. We bought the ink from DuPont and, bought the paper from Hearst Company after they cut down a few forests to make paper out of it. And it stopped working. I mean, the people weren't going into the bookstores. Everything changed with the computer, with the internet. People weren't shopping at Barnes & Noble anymore. Bookstores started closing down. How much of the problems people are having are with the changes in technology? And it actually, to me, it seems like we're really approaching a time, because of the internet, that people are doing pretty incredibly well. It's a time of hope for me, because I can now publish my magazine without paying for paper, without paying for ink. I can do it online and reach 10 times the number of people, possibly, than I could waiting for them to walk into a bookstore. So
right. That there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. There's a couple different things in there. One of the mistakes that businesses make, where they get themselves into, or what, if they stop understanding or checking in with who their clients are, which means, and in bigger terms, that they don't understand the market. Now, if we're talking about publishing in general, I have some experience from that. The delivery of publishing is migrating, right? Now, there's two ways to look at that. One, if you truly understand your customer and their consumption is coming from being delivered via digital means, then you have to provide what your customer wants, when they want it, and in a manner that's reasonably priced that will keep them coming back, as opposed to trying to hold on to your old methodology. The printers, the paper producers, all these people are migrating towards that. So you have to be able to move fast enough to migrate your business into dealing with the digital age, no matter who you are or what industry that you're in. That's a fact of life, but it happens to be that in the printing industry in particular, where your revenues may have been generated by a hard-produced product, you have to migrate that into other areas, your blogs, your things, and be able to be savvy enough to monetize that, with finding different advertisers. Now, you said that you may be in a bind, or your revenue stream may have changed because you've pissed off presidents or publishers or things that have affected your business. Well, what do you do in that instance? Right? You have to seek out either revenue or changes in customers to replace that if your goal is a certain amount of revenue, or you have to change either the branding of what you're doing to accommodate that, which if you're standing on moral and personal principles, you're not going to do. So then it is the onus is on you as a publisher to seek out other like-minded people that understand the delivery system and try to capture revenue from them in order to drill down deeper into the vertical that you're seeking. Now, there are companies, there are businesses and verticals where the economy is coming back. In Michigan, I work very closely with a couple of owners for a very nice family business that I've been with for 3 years that does construction services in the state of Michigan. It was started out of Detroit, called Mobile Air, and they do construction services in this state. And their business has grown because construction has come back in Michigan. Now, this is a good case study. It is a great example of having to blend new technology with old school selling and running your business, because the construction industry generally lags behind in technological terms as far as social media, as far as doing anything with capturing revenue electronically. Promotion, they're the last to get websites, they're the last to go on Twitter, they're the last to have Facebook pages. But now a lot of the larger construction companies, general contractors, dirt movers, even manufacturers such as the Caterpillar, are promoting heavily into social media because the younger people that they're hiring are very savvy to that, and that is how they're approachable. That's how they want to get their information. There's a real separation, a real line of demarcation between people that are working in a construction or other industries, for that matter, that are in their late 30s, early 40s, and older, superintendents, CEOs, C-level people, these contractors or guys that are still working out in the dirt, and younger guys that are project managers and engineers and things that are coming up. And it's very interesting that you have to be able to communicate with both sides of that equation. So old people that are trying to be migrated to a more electronic platform, you have to meet with them face to face. They still like to do things on a handshake. They still like to get things in the mail. They still like telephone calls. All of that stuff is still very important as a basis for that type of business. But you also have to be able to reach some of the newer people that are coming into those decision-making roles. So that person has to be communicated with electronically for the most part, because they want to get a text from you, or they want to get something via email, or they want to get a quick PDF because their demand is so much quicker than somebody that's been in the industry for 20 or 30 years. So that's another example of understanding your customers. Now, the onus is on that company and on me to communicate to that in both ways. And it's a matter of really going back to what your basic understanding of the client in your chosen market is. That make sense?
I believe so. Are you conversant? I've said maybe everyone rises to their own level of incompetence. Mine might be the internet. Now, everything I've done now I've based around the internet, and I've been on this internet site for 20 years, but had my freeamerican.com site for 20 years. But I'm not sure. Part of it is the fact that I'm blocked in libraries, I'm blocked in Intel and Intuit. Hell, I'm blocked at Office Depot. You can't get to the Free American because I guess I've made powerful enemies. Now, if it was, I've been publishing for 20 years. I've started businesses. All of my businesses have worked up until this particular point in time. And, I've thought about and kind of looked for a way to somebody to consult with to figure out ways around this. Maybe I've reached my level of incompetence. So, but it's I know it's not just me. It's a lot of people here. A lot of people are hurting. And yet there's other businesses that I foresaw, and I've talked about years ago. I talked about the Liberty Village concept, and said if you grow your own food and generate your own power from everything God gave us, you're really better off. You're not dependent on the banks or the government for assistance. And those people, the self-sufficient family farm, appears to be under the same kind of attacks that I've been under for the last 10 years. Is this paranoia, or is this a plan for reducing Americans to subservient serfs for a global corporation? What, in your experience,
yeah.
what do you see? I mean, I watch people. There's a little place up in Arlington, Texas. Just a group of people. They call themselves the Garden of Eden, and they're growing their own food. And then suddenly they get raided by the jackbooted thugs that come in and stomp on their tomato plants. It's I've told people that anytime a communist regime takes over a country, they go after three classes of people in order. They go after the self-sufficient family farms first, because they don't want you being able to feed yourself. They go after the intelligentsia next. That's anyone smart enough to know what their anyone that's intelligent enough to, or studied enough to know what they do and how they do it in countries like the Ukraine, where they starve 11 million people. That's like starving 11 million people to death in Kansas. Breadbasket of Russia. Now, how can you cope with that in a business arrangement? And by the way, third class people they go after are the veterans and law enforcement that remain loyal to the old regime. That would be those of us that took an oath to the Constitution and want to defend it.
Yeah, that's that's an interesting dilemma. And now we're getting into the realm of opinion, but what I think I see is going on is, yes, there is an obvious migration towards socialism in this country, and it's been rampant. I think if you look at what our confiscatory tax policies are, some of the things that are done to confiscate or take over, vast land tracts in the West have, one, forced people to migrate from the family farm in towards metropolitan areas, which, you can argue would be a policy of containment for the largest groups of population. It is exceptionally hard to be self-sufficient if you were somebody theoretically that wanted to be, say, off the grid. It's almost impossible to do that in any sort of sizable community, right? You could do it probably with a small family growing plant foods and things, but it would be exceptionally hard to do that in a large population. Even the Amish struggle with that. So I think that you're right. There is we are very much migrating towards what we've seen happen in other countries and more socialistic Europe, and things that did happen in the Ukraine and Russia as far as being a monitored police state. I don't think there's any overlooking or denying that. We hear and are made aware of the things that NSA and those types of things have occurred, and that's probably only the tip of the iceberg, because if we are knowing about it, there are things way beyond that are already occurring. And that's just my personal opinion. But I think there's a lot to be said for, like you're saying. So your question is, how do you deal with that as a business? Well, business regulations are almost impossible to work on now, and that's just a fact of how the playing field is. I had a lot of clients in the past 5 or 6 years that were in the medical industry, and when HIPAA first came out, that was a massive intrusion into the medical industry, into billing, into the way the medical model was going to work, how people were going to get treated. And when the ACA came in first, and it's been slowly, incrementally put in, step by step, into place, and we really haven't got to the true penalty phase yet, it has really made it almost impossible to be in the medical industry. I work with a lot of large health systems now. I'm very aware that they are all changing business models to deal with this and compensate with what the current landscape in the United States is, which happens to be one of regulatory largesse, confiscatory taxes, and almost unfulfillable expectations by an expanding federal bureaucracy. So what is happening in the medical industry? Well, large hospitals, medium systems are putting out 5 to 10 years plan with dramatic losses of revenue. There's a local hospital system here that I was just with the CFO of recently, and they're planning on losing 25% of their current revenue per year for the next 5 to 10 years. And they're consolidating 3 hospitals down into 1, so they have less beds, they have less facility costs, they have less personnel costs, which means they're going to cut jobs for nurses, they're going to cut jobs for doctors, and they're going to allow less people into the hospital on an overnight basis so they can comply with the ACA. That is how they are dealing as a business with the new climate. Other businesses are going to have to do the same, and you're going to see a lot of changes in the way people are hired, and HR policies, and in the way people are paid.
Now, I am not a very big fan of the medical industry. I mentioned my accident 10 years ago. Somebody tapped my phone. Somebody knew the route I was taking. Arranged a accident on my motorcycle. Got me into the hospital and kept me drugged for 3 months. Totally drugged. Got no memory of 3 months in the hospital. And when I woke up, I had a $750,000 hospital bill for 3 broken ribs. Now, the pharmaceutical industry, 20 years ago, you couldn't advertise prescription medicines on the television. Today, every other commercial on the Super Bowl is for a commercial medication. Luvox, Valium, some psychotropic drugs. So, I'm not a very big fan of the medical industry, but things are changing. Naturopathic doctors and naturopathic industries, herbal ingredients are on the rise. So I think we're really looking at a whole new way of looking at things. And one of those changes that we're really facing, I'd like to get your input on this, is what's happened in Colorado. With the legalization of marijuana there, and the fact that farmers can now grow hemp again in Colorado, and hemp was our #1 cash crop at the beginning of this century, last century actually, and somehow they demonized that with the idea, oh, you might get high off of this, you might get stoned off of this, so we can't have it. So we actually built a new industry around the criminalization of hemp. It's called the prison industry. You got private prisons, and we've got more Americans in prison right now than any so-called communist country out there, including Red China with 4 times our population. We put more people in jail. Now, suddenly you don't do that in Colorado. I think, personally, that's the forerunner of legalization of hemp all across the country, because you got 10,000 products made out of hemp, and we got to buy it from Red China. Is that a game changer? Is what happened in Colorado, what's going to happen in Washington and probably Alaska? Is that a game changer in the way we think about things?
It might be. Regarding hemp, President Jefferson grew hemp. Washington grew hemp on his plantation in Virginia. And it was a very valued crop for a long period of time. And I think you're correct, in my opinion, of saying that the legalization or the criminalization of it over the period of time has created revenue for some interest. I can only speculate on what that interest would be, but you are also correct. I recently read the same statistics regarding the prisons, that there is an industry built. I mean, those have all been privatized. Those beds have to be filled, and the vast majority of people that are in there on drug charges. Those are facts. That's a byproduct of what the war on drug policy has been, as well as the privatization of prisons. There's valid argument for the medical use of marijuana in treatments of certain medical conditions and cancers that even the ADA won't argue with. So the other comes down to being a moral argument. So if being a states' rights activist, advocate, I should say, It may change where there are pockets of more progressive people. And it may change slowly. It may take the same type of footprint that the legalization of homosexual marriage is going to take, because you're introducing that concept into like-minded populations. So if the industry in Colorado proves fiscally, financially, that they are able to produce and tax hemp in a way that enhances the local coffers, then that may be a model for other states to follow, and somebody will start making an economic argument for the legalization of marijuana, as opposed to just a moral argument, or an argument of liberty or personal choice, which is primarily what the argument is now, bolstered by sometimes controversial medical use. But it could be. I think there are some pushback against all the regulation and things people are now starting to feel in their personal lives, and being more open to having personal choices. And if they could, show a good tax stream in that state, it may become a model for other states or municipalities.
I wrote books about this 45 years ago. I wrote it as science fiction 45 years ago about the United States in the future, when 46 states had decriminalized marijuana, had abolished all laws against victimless crimes, and really restored freedom and common law to the most of the United States. 4 states maintain the same laws that they have today, and all of the Christians moved to what I call the straight states, because they were afraid of people getting high, running loose, smoking marijuana, Of course, I did write it in the 60s, with free love and all that. And I didn't publish it. I never published that book then, because basically it was too far out, talking about legal drugs and not putting anybody in prison, charging the taxpayers $50,000 a year to keep somebody in room and give somebody room and board in a slave labor camp. It was a little too far out for publishers, so I didn't publish it. But suddenly today, it doesn't seem like science fiction anymore, because of what's happening just in Colorado.
Well, it seems like you're very prescient in your argument, because there absolutely is a large cost to carrying prisoners, and it's a burden that all of the taxpayers of a particular state or county share to support that. And if we are doing that to support somebody that has committed a minor crime, whether it be a drug crime or something that's non-violent, possibly it's time to rethink that and see if that person wouldn't be better off contributing some other way to society than just being incarcerated and being able to have some minor function, within those confines.
Well, I've actually been active in this for 45 years. It's been a long battle, and I helped start the whole paraphernalia industry in this country. All of the head shops I sold to, I sponsored, I published magazines about it. I was the first distributor for High Times in Texas, anyway, and worked with Keith Stroop to do Normal. We started Normal back then, and that's really had an effect. I mean, I financed Jack Hara while he was writing Emperor Wears No Clothes, which is, you might call it a cannabis Bible. He certainly got the history of the big corporations, the oil companies, DuPont and Hearst Company, that somehow convinced us it was okay to cut all those forests down to make paper when we could have been, when the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Encyclopedia Britannica for 100 years was printed on hemp paper. It's and today, I mean, we're finding, again, about your medical industry, the doctors and the pharmaceutical companies don't make any money unless you're sick. So, is it possible that these companies like Monsanto have sprung up to keep us sick? Let's see, Monsanto was the company that provided us with Agent Orange over in Vietnam, and not only sprayed it on the Vietnamese, sprayed it on us. Got lots of friends that are dying of cancer right now because they got sprayed with Agent Orange. And if you're coming back from Iraq, here, son, here's this depleted uranium ammunition. That'll blow up that tank, but it'll kill you in 10 years. So we're being fed genetically modified corn that rats won't eat, and they're feeding it to us and our children. I mean, I maybe call me a conspiracy theorist, but I see something wrong with that. And I really believe that alternative health, or alternative treatment, growing our own food in our backyards or on the roof of our supermarkets, as it's happening now in 6 states, I look at that as a good thing. They're putting greenhouses on the roof of the supermarkets, so the vegetables you buy that day was picked that day and sent down into the store. A company called Bright Farms is doing that, so they've really got a good model. They're working with a supermarket chains, and I think that's a positive thing. I've just put a film up on my Facebook site about the Germany, and you drive in the country in Germany now, and every farmhouse has got solar on it. Why aren't we putting solar on the roof of every house in the neighborhood? 1 square block, take 1 square block, grow food, not grass, in the backyard, and charge our house and run our house on solar. It's happening in Germany. And they've also got big fields of solar collectors out there. Again, I think that's positive. That's a positive growth of industry, and they're still going. BP is certainly going to get into the solar business, and they would love to compete with the consumer. But if you got a windmill and solar on your home, you've really turned your home into an income source without paying out the electric companies for that green energy from that Chinese windmill farm they leased out to the top of that mountain over there. What about that? Is this this is happening worldwide. This is not just the United States. So are we getting smarter? Or are we getting more self-sufficient?
Yeah, I think, and this is my personal statement, I think there's kind of 2 battles being waged right now in our society regarding this area, this topic. There seems to be some sort of grassroots movement towards self-sufficiency and more organic foods and towards health. In my personal life, I'm a big believer in that, and non-GMO foods, and organically grown foods, in supporting your local farmers market, knowing where your food comes from. I am also personally not a big fan of most Western medicine and the Western medical model as it sits today. It wasn't always like that. What Western medicine does very well that other societies don't is Western medicine is very good at traumatic medicine, at trauma. So if you get in a car accident and you break your leg or you puncture your spleen, they are very good at invasive surgery. There's an amazing amount of technology. There's amazing things you can do if you're going to go inside the body and fix something that's traumatically broken. They are not good at preventative medicine. They are not good at promoting health. It is not good at promoting a state of being that does not require pharmaceuticals to fix. Now, as far as the American economy is going, it used to be solely an agricultural and oil-based economy. Those were and manufacturing, manufacturing is really oil-based because transportation and running all the factories, all of those things use fuel, which are either oil or coal. Those were the largest legs of our economy. Now there's another leg. The pharmaceuticals and the medical industry has really started to take up an enormous amount of our GDP, and people's personal disposable income has now been absorbed by insurance costs and pharmaceutical costs, and it doesn't cure anything. What, in my opinion, is that most Western pharmaceuticals mask the symptoms as opposed to curing it or treating it. I think there's a long ways to go towards, being healthier, and I think a lot of people are starting to realize that, so they are dropping out of that and trying to find naturopathic medicine. And I think there was a saying that was Aristotle, right? To let your food be your medicine and let your medicine be your food. And I think a lot of people are buying into that. And as far as companies like Monsanto go, yes, there's a lot of really challenging things going on with that company. There's what I've seen that's interesting about them is some of the legislation that protects them when they plant some of their GMO corn next to, say, an adjacent field of natural form non-GMO corn, and some of their pollen spreads next door. My understanding is that this legislation that could be confiscated, and that person owes recompense to the company of Monsanto for putting that in.
I think
there's a lot of yeah. Go ahead.
I think that should be exactly the opposite. If Monsanto's GMO foods come over and contaminate an organic corn, I think the farmer ought to be compensated by Monsanto. I think it's just totally reversed.
I agree, but you have to look at the American Department of Agriculture is not going to enforce something like that, because really it exists for counterintuitive reasons, right? On one side, it's supposed to promote the health and well-being of the U.S. citizen, and on the other side, it is also supposed to promote the selling of commodities. So those two are often at odds, because with such a large processed packaged based food system, when you look at the shelves in your grocery store, most of that is supported by suppliers of commodities, such as wheat and corn. And that is subsidized by us, and the regulations that promote that or prohibit act as barriers to entry to other more healthy entries are regulated by us, we the people, through our government.
there is, I think we've got a whole revolution here. Everything that we've talked about here. You said I was kind of ahead of my time, and I think I was. Everything I talked about 45 years ago is now happening, and I think my biggest problem is trying to figure out how to capitalize on good advice.
Well, I'll say a couple things before I go. One, you're welcome to come anytime. I'll work with you just happily, just for the fun of it. Because there are, as far as if we're going to go back to, talking about the nuts and bolts of building a business or things you have to do to get from point A to point B, there's a lot of chapters in the book that cover some of the things that the way we make decisions to promote that. But it's also a matter of defining clearly, right, what your goals are, your objectives, laying out your strategies. But you've also got to have some sort of accountability to yourself and to your business and to anybody that works for you. Then you have to be able to control those things. So you have to manage things that you can actually control. And then you have to have consequences when those things aren't controlled. So sometimes if you're just a single entrepreneur, the consequences is you're not making revenue. But you still have to have, right, clearly defined goals. You have to be able to understand where you're at in your business at any given time, which means where your daily cash flows are, where you are as a percentage in the marketplace, and understanding the potential of your market. So it's a matter of definitions first, and a lot of times, it's a matter of having a personal process and changing some of your paradigms in order to move forward, because sometimes you get stuck in your own stew a little bit.
All right, James, we're coming up on the hour here. I would like to talk to you off the air sometime, because I can only do so much as one man, and my nickname for many years was the Loner. Even when I was in a motorcycle club, I'd say, "Where are we going today? I'll meet you there. The beer will be on the bar whenever you straggle in." So I said part of the problem for us patriots is many of us are so independent that we really have a problem working with people. But there are companies now, and they're growing. We're rapidly growing. Solar companies are one. The U.S. Navy has discovered that we don't need gasoline to run the ships on at sea. They can run them off of the water they float on. And I've got a friend that wants to be president. He says he's going to run under hemp and hydrogen, and I think that's a good thing too. I mean, we've got plans. If you go to my Facebook, Free American 69, check on what the solar industry is doing in Germany, and what some of the patents are, what some of the devices are. We've got massive solar arrays that could be constructed on our very highways. Instead of putting down asphalt, you put down solar panels that'll light up if a deer walks across it, that you can charge your electric cars off of. And we've got companies that have built tires that will bolt right onto that Tesla electric car and charge the batteries from the wheels while it's moving. We've got tremendous potential here. Doesn't have to be a $100,000 Tesla vehicle. It could be that little Chinese Volkswagen that runs off the sun. James, I'll have you back. I'd like to talk to you up there. Give me a call anytime.
Okay, Clay, my friend. It was nice to talk to you.
Nice talking to you. Nice having you on. Thank you.
All right, feel free to call me anytime.
All right, I will.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
All right, sure. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Discover what's really going on in the world that mainstream media won't tell you. At Truth Radio, you can listen live or listen to a large selection of archived programs. TruthRadio.com. The truth is out there. Do you flinch when a police car appears in your rearview mirror, or you get pulled over? Are you squeamish when an envelope arrives in the mail with the return address of a court, a government agency like the IRS, or some law firm? Would you like to escape government agency harassment? Then visit escapeharassment.com. George Bush allegedly says the government constitution is nothing but a doggone piece of paper. Well, that's a contract. A contract is an offer acceptance of that offer, at which point a contract arrives by law and the offerer can no longer withdraw the offer. We teach, do not accept. That way there is no contract or agreement for you to go to their court or private club meeting. To escape government agency harassment like the IRS, visit escapeharassment.com. This is a tried and proven experience process, not experimental, with a money-back guarantee that it works and success testimonials from previous students. Remember, escapeharassment.com. That's escapeharassment.com.
All right. My commercial there for Truth Radio. Why don't you listen to that? Why don't you listen to that? Now, the second hour, I want to, let's do something here. A couple of different things that you really need to know about, I believe. Maybe we'll talk about the marijuana miracle that's happening. And what else we got? What else we got? This. And it says, stop what you're doing, watch this video, it's in entirety, you won't be sorry. It's up at the very first video. First off, let me prove to you the New World Order, Skull and Bones, Illuminati are real.
Republican and Democratic presidents alike, from Harry Truman to George Bush, stood for freedom.
This is Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, working after he became president, still working for George Bush, Skull and Bones. Listen to Bill Clinton, Rhodes Scholar.
And stood for certain propositions that would make America strong and healthy and grow the middle class and shrink poverty and stand against communism. And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society. It's so secret we can't talk about it. What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322. First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look for... Are you prepared to lose? No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations.
This was George Bush Sr. after he had tried to put me out of business and threatened me after I ran the whole story of Operation Watchtower, which is still available in my book, Mystery Babylon, The New World Order Unveiled. I've got the whole story there from my friend Bill Tyree, William Tyree. They murdered Tyree's wife and framed him for the murder to keep him from talking about his experiences in Colombia working for Colonel Edward P. Catolo. And this was the first time I got threatened by the CIA. And when I heard Bush say this after I had seen this document ran right along with Iran-Contra, ran right along after Waco. Actually, I got the document before Waco, and then when I saw what happened at Waco, I swore I would never sit back and watch something like that happen on television again. George Bush Sr.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
All communists. They've been in our government. Here's the damage they've caused. Are you ready? Here it is.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this.
The ideal we think ought to be the top 20%, the middle 20%, and somewhere in between, the poorest at about 10%, but it don't work that way.
This country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are. Teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here's the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money. But do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
Every human on this planet is enslaved, whether they know it or not. This is not the crude and primitive slavery of ancient times. It does not rely on whips and shackles to keep the oppressed in their place. These tools have been rendered obsolete by much more sophisticated methods. That most of the enslaved are unaware of their condition and would in fact argue fiercely that they are free is a testament to the effectiveness of these invisible chains. You heard the expression, money makes the world go round. There's truth in that. Money is the prime motive for human labor in modern civilization. If you want food, shelter, and clothing, you must have money. And unless you're part of that tiny minority that has more money than they could ever spend in their lifetime, then you must work, beg, or steal for that money. That's why you get up in the morning and go to work, even if you hate your job. And that's why the specter of unemployment is more terrifying for most people than the prospect of spending 50 years of their life performing menial tasks within the confines of a fluorescent-lit cubicle. Of course, in Western countries, some are fortunate enough to have pulled away from the brink and do not live in fear that their basic needs will be met, at least for now. And yet they keep spinning the hamster wheel. Why is that? Could it be because money and the bling that it buys have become symbols of status and prestige? Money offers an illusory form of social validation, but even those who are not caught up in distinguishing themselves by how much they accumulate still must acknowledge the social stigma that comes with poverty. The combination of these primal motivators, the need for food, shelter, clothing, and social validation, is a very powerful force. It's enough to drive humans to engage in all forms of activity, even to the point of harming themselves or others in the process. The accumulation of money is therefore an accumulation of social and psychological power, and those who control the creation of money control this power at its source. So who controls the creation of money? Well, in the case of the U.S. dollar, it's not the government. This shouldn't be an earth-shattering revelation. The The fact that the Federal Reserve is a private institution owned by a cartel of the world's most powerful banks is quickly becoming common knowledge. Even the mainstream media doesn't deny it at this point. However, the full extent of what this means is only clear when you understand how the banking system really works. And unfortunately, this isn't something we're taught in school. Once you have it explained to you in simple terms, you'll understand why. Every dollar in circulation is loaned into existence by a bank. The process begins with the Federal Reserve when they loan out money to the U.S. government and to other entities. You've probably heard this talked about before, especially in regards to the interest rate on those loans, which the Federal Reserve raises and lowers depending on economic conditions. But what's never talked about in the mainstream is the fact that the Fed isn't actually loaning out money that they have. They are merely typing those dollars into existence on a computer. You may be inclined to believe this money is based on some physical backing like gold, but you would be mistaken. The Federal Reserve hasn't owned any gold since the 1930s.
We don't. The Federal Reserve does not own any gold at all. We have not owned gold since 1934. So we have not engaged in any gold swaps.
When the Federal Reserve loans money to the U.S. government gives the Federal Reserve government bonds in exchange. These bonds are simply written promises to pay back the money that was loaned to them with interest through taxation. So to be clear here, the government is taking out a loan from a bank that's creating that money out of thin air, and they're expecting you, the taxpayer, to cover that loan. The absurdity of this arrangement is even more obvious when you realize that up until 1913, the U.S. government created its own money and had no need for a bank to play the part of a middleman. That new money loaned out by the Federal Reserve enters circulation through the banks, accumulates in the banks, and in the end, the banks end up holding all the cards. Not necessarily for the reasons you may imagine. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of money in circulation isn't actually created by the Federal Reserve, but rather by the ordinary banks that businesses and individuals use for their checking, savings, and mortgages. How is this possible? Well, like the Federal Reserve, ordinary banks are allowed to loan out money that they don't have. There are, of course, restrictions. Banks are only allowed to loan out 10 times the amount of money that they actually have. So if Wells Fargo has $1,000, they can loan you $10,000, and they expect you to pay back that $10,000 plus interest. This is called fractional reserve banking. 75% of all money in circulation is created in this manner. Now, as bad as this may seem, this is really only the tip of the iceberg. Most banks structure payment plans so that for many years, you're paying almost nothing but interest, and only start paying down the principal gradually. The result of this strategy is that in most cases, you pay far more in interest when you purchase a house than the house itself is worth. So here's the real question. If all money is created through loans, where does the money come from to pay for the interest? Let's say we reset the system to zero, loan $1,000 into existence, and charge 7% interest. We now have a total of $1,000 in the system, but we owe $1,000 plus interest, and that's more. The interest ensures that there's always more debt than money in circulation, because the money to pay the interest doesn't exist, never has, never will. This would be obvious if there was only one loan being issued to one person in this manner, but when performed on a global scale, the reality is hidden. It is transformed into a game of musical chairs where the person ending up without a seat faces bankruptcy and financial ruin. Because every dollar in existence is tied to a debt, this creates an unseen force that draws those dollars back to the banks, kind of like gravity attracts a physical object to Earth. The catch here is that it's the labor of the people that moves that money. Every hour that you work to pay back a loan or to keep the government from throwing you in jail over income taxes is an hour worked for the banks. The total receipts from personal income taxes just barely covers the interest on the national debt. And even the principal for that debt all ends up back in the hands of the banks. Now remember, that bank created that money out of nothing. Once you understand that the money that banks loan out isn't actually an asset, but is in fact a piece of legal fiction, it should be clear that you're working for these banks for free. This is a cleverly disguised form of slavery. If you manage to pay your monthly payments, then you are a successful slave, and you're allowed to keep the material comforts that come with that status. But if for some reason you fail to make those monthly payments, then the bank or the IRS comes to take your house, your car, and anything else you have of value. And if somehow, even with this enormous financial advantage, banks still get themselves into trouble, you, the taxpayer, will be forced to bail them out. No matter what, the banks win. To say the game is rigged is an understatement. You might be inclined to think that if you live outside the United States and you don't use dollars, then this situation has no bearing on your life. But you would be wrong. The dollar is both the world reserve currency and the only currency in which oil is sold on global markets. This is often referred to as the petrodollar status. This means that wherever you live, whether your country is an oil exporter or an oil importer, you are affected. If your country is an oil importer, then you are affected by the fact that in order to keep your country running, you have to acquire dollars. To acquire those dollars, you have to send goods and services to the United States or to someone else who did. Likewise, if your country is an oil exporter, you are affected by the fact that you send your oil to the U.S. in exchange for this debt-based money. You're exchanging something of real and tangible value for digits on a screen. And if for some reason the leadership of your country grows tired of this arrangement and tries to pull off the dollar, you'll quickly find the United States military at your doorstep ready to open up a can of democracy on you. Iraq learned this the hard way when they switched their oil sales to euros in 2000, and Libya when they tried to organize a gold-based currency for Africa. Debt-based money is a masterpiece of social engineering, the ultimate tool of the ruling elite. Yet in reality, the whole thing is nothing more than a construct of belief. Our chains are the chains of the mind, and the path to freedom must also begin in the mind. If we want a better future for our children and grandchildren, then we must work right now to reach a critical mass of awakening. Why did the United States attack Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen? Why are U.S. operatives helping to destabilize Syria? And why is the United States government so intent on taking down Iran, in spite of the fact that Iran has not attacked any country since 1798? And what's next? What are we headed for? When you look at the current trajectory that we're on, it doesn't make any sense at all if you evaluate it based on what we're taught in school. And it doesn't make any sense if you base your worldview on the propaganda that the mainstream media tries to pass off as news. But it makes perfect sense once you know the real motives of the powers that be. In order to understand those motives, we first have to take a look at history. In 1945, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world reserve currency, which meant that international commodities were priced in dollars. The agreement, which gave the United States a distinct financial advantage, was made under the condition that those dollars would remain redeemable for gold at a consistent rate of $35 per ounce. The United States promised not to print very much money, but this was on the honor system, because the Federal Reserve refused to allow any audits or supervision of its printing presses. In the years leading up to 1970, expenditures in the Vietnam War made it clear to many countries that the U.S. was printing far more money than it had in gold. And in response, they began to ask for their gold back. This, of course, set off a rapid decline in the value of the dollar. The situation climaxed in 1971 when France attempted to withdraw its gold and Nixon refused. On August 15th, he made the following announcement.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
This was obviously not a temporary suspension, as it claimed, but rather a permanent default. And for the rest of the world who had entrusted the United States with their gold, it was outright theft. In 1973, President Nixon asked King Faisal of Saudi Arabia to accept only U.S. dollars as payment for oil and to invest any excess profits in U.S. Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. In return, Nixon offered military protection for Saudi oil fields. The same offer was extended to each of the world's key oil-producing countries, and by 1975, every member of OPEC had agreed to only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. The act of moving the dollar off of gold and tying it to foreign oil instantly forced every oil-importing country in the world to start maintaining a constant supply of Federal Reserve paper. And in order to get that paper, they would have to send real physical goods to America. This was the birth of the petrodollar. Paper went out, everything America needed came in, and the United States got very, very rich as a result. It was the largest financial con in recorded history. The arms race of the Cold War was a game of poker. Military expenditures were the chips, and the U.S. had an endless supply of chips. With the petrodollar under its belt, it was able to raise the stakes higher and higher, outspending every other country on the planet, until eventually U.S. military expenditures surpassed that of all other nations in the world combined. The Soviet Union never had a chance. The collapse of the communist bloc in 1991 removed the last counterbalance to American military might. The United States was now an undisputed superpower with no rival. Many hoped that this would mark the beginning of a new era of peace and stability. Unfortunately, there were those in high places who had other ideas. Within that same year, the U.S. invaded Iraq in the first Gulf War. And after crushing the Iraqi military and destroying their infrastructure,
including water purification plants and hospitals. Crippling sanctions were imposed which prevented that infrastructure from being rebuilt. These sanctions, which were initiated by Bush Sr. and sustained throughout the entire Clinton administration, lasted for over a decade and were estimated to have killed over 500,000 children. The Clinton administration was fully aware of these figures.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it? I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Ms. Albright, what exactly was it that was worth killing 500,000 kids for? In November of 2000, Iraq began selling its oil exclusively in euros. This was a direct attack on the dollar and on U.S. financial dominance, and it wasn't going to be tolerated.
And suddenly 9/11 happened. Now, as you probably know, 9/11 was an inside job. If you don't know about it, well, look at the evidence for yourself.
In response, the U.S. government, with the assistance of the mainstream media, began to build up a massive propaganda campaign claiming that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and was planning to use them. In 2003, the U.S. invaded, and once they had control of the country, oil sales were immediately switched back to dollars. This is particularly notable due to the fact that switching back to the dollar meant a 15 to 20% loss in revenue due to the euro's higher value. It doesn't make any sense at all unless you take the petrodollar into account.
Yeah, you heard right. We fought all those wars to keep the Federal Reserve banking system in power. Yes, they killed 3,000 people on 9/11. They are the real terrorists. We sacrificed millions of our own children in war and millions in Afghanistan to profit the banks. We did all that just so the banks can continue to purposefully put our country into debt and charge us interest, making us slaves. Every single citizen of the United States, no matter the age, owes over $50,000 to the Federal Reserve banking system. That's without interest. It will cost 5 times that by the time we get around to paying. Nobody will ever be able to pay off this debt. We are effectively already slaves to the Federal Reserve banking system. What I've been telling you forever. If you think our government wouldn't commit 9/11, pause video, look up Operation Northwoods, another false flag operation not like 9/11. It's a real declassified mission by our own government to initiate war with Cuba. Again, it's called Operation Northwoods. If you haven't heard about it, look it up now on Google. Did you notice the leaders of all branches of our military signed off on it? Congress even signed off on it. Everybody but JFK. Since he did not sign off of it, it was later signed off by George Bush, hence 9/11. These banks, the Federal Reserve, run our government. Our founding fathers were afraid of this happening, and Thomas Jefferson warned us about that.
To preserve our independence, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. We must make our choice between economy and liberty or profusion and servitude.
Wow. Thomas Jefferson actually said this.
I place economy among the first and most important of Republican virtues, and public debt is the greatest of the dangers to be feared. It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes.
We must have a central bank to secure this country's finances.
If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their money, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless on the very continent their fathers conquered.
How many families lost
We
their
are
homes?
opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
John F. Kennedy.
That relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
What's happening? Where am I? I believe perhaps you understand now, Bob, but you are afraid. JFK. Hartman, what does this have to do with my house and my dog? Oh, okay, that's enough. I want to go home now. This is the last president to stand up to the Fed. You must see. On June 4, 1963, President Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110. This executive order empowered the U.S. Treasury to issue real money without the Fed. it would have worked. Kennedy's plan to dismantle the Federal Reserve machine had begun. 6 months later, John F. Kennedy went to Dallas and never returned. No way they could do that. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, threw out Kennedy's order. And since JFK, no president has dared confront the secret powers behind the Federal Reserve. They consolidate bigger and bigger banks, print more and more money, accountable to no one, decimating our nation's wealth for the benefit of a few. Why? Why do this?
Why do this? David Rockefeller, owner of the Federal Reserve, and his family have always wanted a one-world government that they controlled. Same with the Rothschilds. Same with Jacob Schiff. Same with J.P. Morgan. Ever wonder why the Illuminati New World Order symbol and saying is on the back of every dollar bill? It's because the Federal Reserve phony money is the biggest step to completing the New World Order. And all of this is admitted by Rockefeller in his own book. Some even believe we're a part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political economic structure, one world if you will. If that's a charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. All media, this includes newspapers, news stations, articles, excluding what's available on the internet, are all owned by 4 corporations. It's not an opinion, it is a fact, and it's no secret at all. Look it up for yourself. It's public information. Now, folks, the ones he does not own, he works with. If you don't believe it, he even admitted to it, again, at a meeting of the Council on Foreign Relations. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises for discretion for over 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights. David Rockefeller's private Federal Reserve gave him enough money to buy politicians and presidents. As Rothschild said, allow me to issue and control the money of a nation. I care not who writes its laws. David Rockefeller is purposely collapsing the U.S. economy. Ever wonder why Obama spent more money than all 43 presidents combined in just one of his 2 terms? He spent more money than 200 years worth of presidents in 1 term. He is purposely collapsing the economy. He's going to collapse it so bad it devalues all currency, and we will need to come together as a world to create one world currency. He is also going to use the economic collapse as a way to take complete control over the American people. All we need is a right major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order. David Rockefeller, 1994. When the economy collapses, there will be people killing each other for food and supplies. This is when the government will step in and demand to give them more power to protect us from ourselves. They will do whatever it takes to take away our guns. They even staged Sandy Hook to take our guns away. They want you disarmed for the economic collapse so they can take over. If you didn't know Sandy Hook was an inside job, well, see the evidence available on YouTube. The laws are already to take over America, are already set up. All they have to do is collapse the economy. And you probably heard about a whistleblower, Snowden, recently came out of our government, admitting 2 things that our government was doing that were unconstitutional and illegal. The NSA have been collecting every U.S. citizen's emails, text messages, voicemails, Google searches, and phone calls. The IRS was using this illegal database to target and audit people who were warning of the corruption in the Federal Reserve, as well as Tea Parties, people who support the Constitution. They're collecting your information and classifying you in 3 categories. And I told you this over 20 years ago. I told you about this. You'll hear from my friend Jack McLam, whose show I used to do. You know of the New World Order penalty, FEMA camps for re-education. 2, you are telling others about the New World Order and are preparing to fight back. The penalty is death. You are clueless. Penalty, death slave.
But anyway, I've had people calling me saying they go out to their mailbox and they find a little red dot or a little blue dot on their mailbox, and they wonder what the little red dot and blue dot is. Well, it's marking your mailbox by the government, so when foreign troops come in here on us after martial law, if you have a red dot on your mailbox, they take you out immediately and shoot you right in the head. But if you have a blue dot, they take you to the FEMA camps being built by Halliburton right now to house 50 million Americans. They're building enough concentration camps in America by Halliburton that Cheney's getting rich off of, Vice President Cheney's getting rich off of, to put those with the blue dot on your mailbox in those concentration camps. Now, if you go out and you find a pink dot on your mailbox, that means that they believe you'll be a good slave and you're going to go along with the program and serve our international Antichrist masters. So watch for that dot.
The bullets, the coffins, the morgue, the FEMA camps, the executioners, Russians that are here right now to work directly with FEMA, and the laws all set up this are already here. It's already set up and ready for the economic collapse.
Have you heard that the Department of Homeland Security has purchased 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition last year? I mean, that's got to cost millions and millions of dollars. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this country broke? I mean, you turn on the TV, you hear how we're laying off air traffic controllers, how people are going to die because of it. I mean, Harrison Ford is in a tizzy, and we're spending this much money on bullets? Do you know that 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition is enough to fight a 20-year war and still have bullets left over? My question is, who is the Department of Homeland Security planning to shoot? Do you realize that over the past couple of months, our government has tried to pass bills through Congress allowing them to arrest American citizens without due process, allowing them to kill American citizens without due process?
An ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism. President Obama today proposed something new, something called prolonged detention. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Prolonged detention. Did you ever see the movie Minority Report? It was based on a Philip K. Dick short story. Came out in 2002. It starred Tom Cruise, remember? He played a police officer in something called the Department of Pre-Crime. Pre-crime is where people are arrested and incarcerated to prevent crimes that they have not yet committed.
Mr. Marks, by mandate of the District of Columbia Pre-Crime Division, I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubinos to take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours 4 minutes. No, I didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything, but you're gonna. Future murder. Creepy, right? Putting somebody in jail not for what they've done, but for what you're very sure they're going to do?
There may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes. In some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States.
We're not prosecuting them for past crimes, but we need to keep them in prison because of our expectation of their future crimes.
Al-Qaeda terrorists and their affiliates are at war with the United States, and those that we capture, like other prisoners of war, must be prevented from attacking us again.
Prevented. We will incarcerate people preventively. Preventive incarceration. Indefinite detention without trial. That's what this is. That's what President Obama proposed today, if you strip away the euphemisms. One civil liberties advocate told the New York Times today, quote, "We've known this was on the horizon for many years, but we were able to hold it off with George Bush. The idea that we might find ourselves fighting with the Obama administration over these powers is really stunning." And it is stunning.
And it's got the 5 regions for the FEMA camps, and it talks about barricades and barbed wire and armed guards, and it says that they built the camps and that now they need to get ready to staff them, and that they need to be ready within a 72-hour period. And so I want to challenge everybody to call their friends and their families now and realize that the new economy is to put tens of millions of people, we already have the biggest prison population in the world, in this archipelago, this giant chain of facilities all over the country.
The following video details the contents of a Department of Defense document entitled Internment and Resettlement Operations, also known as FM 3-39.40. The document is 325 pages long and is signed by Joyce E. Maioho, Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Army. It was created in 2010, however, has just been recently leaked to the public via the internet and can now be downloaded from multiple sources. In the description below, you'll find a download link for the document. I strongly encourage you to download it yourself and to verify everything that's being said here. The document outlines military procedures for internment and resettlement of civilians, and it describes the layout and the administration of these internment camps. It clearly states on page 38 that it applies within U.S. territory, and it specifically addresses the detainment of U.S. citizens, as is indicated by the identification procedures for new prisoners on page 146, which states that social security numbers are to be recorded alongside their photograph and fingerprints. Included in the list of organizations which may be involved in these internment operations are the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, the Department of Defense, and the United Nations. On page 56, the document outlines the responsibilities of psychological operations officers within the camps, among which it states that a PSYOP officer develops and executes indoctrination programs to reduce or remove antagonistic attitudes and identifies political activists. On page 281, the document goes into more detail regarding the role of psychological operations within the camps, specifically in regards to pacifying the population and ensuring cooperation. On page 238, it gives the conditions for the use of deadly force in such camps. Among the justifications for lethal force, it includes to terminate an active escape attempt. That point right there should make it clear that these camps are not benevolent disaster relief type facilities. On page 244, the document calls for the use of snipers during riots to, quote, scan a crowd and identify agitators and riot leaders for apprehension and fire lethal rounds if warranted. On page 260, it shows the basic layout for a facility focusing on detainment. It is depicted with interrogation areas, tribunal areas, and mortuaries. Each detainment facility is designed to hold 4,000 prisoners, and they are depicted with multiple levels of barbed wire separating compartments within the facilities, with a double barbed wire fence enclosing them, and watched over by 24 guard towers. On page 261, the document depicts the layout for what they call civilian resettlement facilities, which are designed to house 8,000 people. Though it uses the word resettlement, the plans show multiple levels of barbed wire dividing the sections of the facility, with double barbed wire fencing on the outside, as well as 16 guard towers. On page 262, the layout for facilities designed for what they call non-compliant prisoners is shown. These camps are designed to hold up to 300 prisoners, they have 3 interrogation centers, and are guarded by 13 guard towers. Now, if there's any question whether these plans are active or just theoretical, this should be settled by the fact that the U.S. Army has been running ads for job positions in these camps since 2009, and apparently, they're still hiring. Once again, if you look in the description, you'll find all the links you need to verify this information. It's important to note here that this document was created in 2010, which was under the Obama administration, and it predates the NDAA of 2012, which authorized military detainment of U.S. citizens. This clearly shows a long-term agenda at work.
What they're doing right now, they're in a helicopter or a plane, and they're showing these massive buildings, FEMA camp. I'm not sure of the location, but it stretches for miles and miles and miles.
I was pulled to the side road, which was a new cut gravel dirt road in front of a business, or builder supply business, and the right side of the road was filled with which I thought was portable toilets. I never looked at them that close. Same in color, maybe black, but which was an odd color. And I asked him about the field of black boxes. What were they? Because I'd never seen anything like that. And his statement was that if he told me, I would be one of few people in Madison, Georgia that knew about them. and he says they're disposable coffins, I believe he told me. And he says there's 100 at that time, and he said there was 125,000 there.
And the brother of the man that owns this field, that the government is leasing this field from to store these disposable coffins, this brother was given 3 years to set up temporary morgues around the country.
Yeah, you heard that right. Today it's completely illegal for the government to kill you or permanently detain you on the spot without due process if they consider you a terrorist. Does that make you a terrorist nowadays? What makes you a terrorist nowadays? Believing in the Constitution, for
We
one.
now have a policy as exemplified by the FBI brochure from on counterterrorism, which says people who are defenders of the U.S. Constitution against federal government and the UN, and make numerous references to the U.S. Constitution, should be monitored as potentially murderous and fanatical terrorists.
Yes, they can kill you or permanently detain you if you simply mention the Constitution. And I was listed by name in this document. That's not all. Believing and knowing of or mentioning the New World Order and 9/11 was an inside job makes you a terrorist.
Department of Justice memo, which tells local police what should you be looking out for in kind of everyday terrorism prevention and terrorism watch activities. And one risk is individuals who harbor doubts about the official story regarding 9/11. The memo adds 9/11 official story skeptics to the growing list of targets.
That's right, it's all set up. You saw how they accomplished their New World Order takeover. But what exactly is the New World Order? Brace yourself, here it is.
If you go outside the city of Atlanta, go east about 60 or 70 miles to the town of Elberton, and then go north on Highway 77 about 10 miles, you'll find off to the right what's called the Georgia Guidestones. Looks kind of like Stonehenge, these big, huge granite rocks set up there. This was done by a guy, we have a pseudonym, came in, paid cash, had this company set these things up in 1980, called himself R.C. Christian, but that's not his real name. It says it right on the stones, a pseudonym, false name. On these Georgia Guidestones, it gives the 10 Commandments for the New World Order. 10 Commandments for the New World Order. The first commandment was to maintain humanity under 500 million. I went there and looked at those things and said, now, hold on a minute. Today's population is 6 billion. They want to maintain humanity under 1/2 billion. Looks like a lot of people got to die for their plan to work, which is, by the way, the plan. Jacques Cousteau said we'd have to eliminate 350,000 people a day. 1/3 of a billion people a day would have to be eliminated to save Mother Earth. Bill Clinton said we need to reduce the population of the earth to 1 billion. There are a lot of folks who would like to reduce the population of the earth. The Bible command is quite the opposite.
The people who are not FEMA camped or executed will effectively be tax and interest slaves on a debt. They will continue to eat GMO foods like they have for the past 10 years and will become infertile. Right now, 95% of all foods that are genetically modified, and they cause cancer and infertility.
My friends, the information that you are about to witness from all of my years of research is the most important. It's been hidden in plain view the entire time. This is the ultimate secret, and it's about to be exposed. hundreds of government documents, textbooks, white papers, where for over 80 years the elite of the Western world have talked about adulterating food and water to sicken and sterilize the population for the purpose of eugenics. It's all covered in the book Eco-Science, written by the White House science czar John P. Holdren, where they talk about a planet.
Oops, hold on.
Military police state to carry out the forced sterilization. They also talk about covert systems in the water and food to sterilize the population. Now, this was written decades ago, before he was White House science czar. Now, suddenly, the stuff in this book is all over the news. They're selling it to the public as if it's a good thing. You see here before you what an average person would buy when they went shopping at the store. Not everything here is bad for you, but much of it has compounds and artificial chemicals that have been added that are extremely toxic and bad for your health, and they have known this the entire time, and they have approved them for use. Let's start with aspartame. You cannot go to the grocery store now and buy any type of even regular sugar gum that hasn't had aspartame added to it. In the 1970s, Searle tried to get it approved, and they couldn't. It took them 3 separate times, because in their own studies with monkeys, large portions of them that were fed it died and contracted cancer. Now we have mainstream news articles, and the EU has done a major study finding lower birth weights, early birth, and yes, miscarriages from women that drink aspartame-laden soft drinks like Coke Zero. What is aspartame? It is the fecal matter of the E. coli bacteria. They took it and genetically engineered it. They can feed it toxic waste, and then it defecates aspartame. And it has so many bad health effects, it's just unspeakable. This is being done by design. It's also very, very addictive. But let's just go ahead and move away from aspartame and talk about McDonald's and chicken McNuggets. Now, I remember a decade ago or so reading health advisories claiming that a form of plastic that's used in silly putty, basically a type of silicone, was in the chicken McNuggets, but also in many other TV dinners and other foods. It is illegal in every other nation in the world to add these chemicals to the food, but it's not in the United States. The big secret is all of this was done by design by the FDA. Look at all the drugs they've approved, and then it comes out later that they knowingly approve them when these drugs are causing heart attacks and cancer. In the Nuremberg trials, it came out that the Nazis were adding sodium fluoride to the water supply in the labor camps and death camps to make the population more docile and controllable. There had been hundreds of university studies before Hitler even came to power. This is a form of forced medication. They admit that 1 part per million of sodium fluoride more than doubles the chance of bone cancer in boys and men. As the public became educated in the last few decades, the government and industry's response was to not just put it in water, but to start adding it to thousands of products, like children's water that's mixed with their formula or with their cereal. They started adding as much as 900 parts per million in things like powdered eggs. It causes reductions in IQ. It increases sterility or lack of fertility, and it's being added to so many of the daily staples that we consume. We'll get back to food additives in a moment. But first I wanted to look at genetically modified organisms. Did you know for many years the American people have been eating cloned beef and pork, and now they're expanding out into other forms of meat? Let's look at salmon first. Major university studies conclusively have proven that the type of genetically modified salmon that is actually a cross species, they've mixed other animal genes in with it, that when this fish is introduced with wild natural salmon, within 40 generations, all of the natural salmon are extinct. And the FDA approved this. And they're going to allow it to be released into the wild that isn't even a salmon. It is a cross-species chimera. It is a mixture like something out of the island of Dr. Moreau, something out of a nightmare. More than 85% of the corn now consumed in the United States, and it's also starting to trend that way in Europe and Canada, is genetically engineered. It grows its own pesticide within the corn kernels so that insects won't eat it. If the insects can't eat this and live, what do you think is going to happen when lab rats or humans eat it? We have literally hundreds of studies showing that not just Monsanto's, but other major GMO companies' corn, and that's the majority of corn we're now eating today in the United States, has been linked to organ failure in lab animals. The studies also show massive increases in sterility in rats and guinea pigs that are fed not just GMO corn, but GMO cotton seeds. Studies in India, Germany, and the United States have conclusively shown that when they feed the cotton seeds left over from the cotton crop from these genetically modified varieties, that the cows are having miscarriages, they are having low birth weights, or in many cases, they're simply dying. And what is in most processed foods? Genetically modified cottonseed oil. Major studies are also showing that genetically engineered crops are killing honeybees and monarch butterflies. They don't stop there. Now they claim they're coming out with a genetically engineered mosquito that's malaria-proof that they're going to release into the open biosphere. The very genetic code of the planet is being butchered in a hostile corporate takeover. Many years ago, an executive from Monsanto was quoted in National Geographic as saying that that is their program, that they want to basically have their crops and their organisms take over the entire biosphere of this planet. And the major genetic engineer companies have focused mainly on 8 major food crops. Now they're expanding out into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other plants, literally changing the genetic code of the planet. This is a genetic dictatorship. This is genetic vandalism. And that's why the Rockefellers, the United Nations, and others have built these giant armored seed vaults all over the world, not just at the Arctic Circle. And they admit they're doing it in case all of this gets out of hand, but they'll have a type of Noah's Ark. So all these fake environmental groups, they never complain about this. They never talk about true environmental degradation. They want to put a tax on carbon dioxide that humans exhale, that plants respirate from and carry out photosynthesis with, as a way to shut down industrial society and control every facet of our lives. That's the big secret. This is a population reduction program.
My name is Ned, and it is my job to provide you with outstanding. Sir, may I please have your phone number so I can locate your account?
Hello.